This One's Wife. Bellendgame. Harry in the dark. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. We're well into autumn, season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, as Keats once wrote. And the air takes on a definite different quality in the northern hemisphere in autumn. Naturally, it's cooler. But it's not just that. There's a certain smell to the air. Perhaps it's the leaves that have fallen from the trees starting to decompose. Perhaps it's the smell of fireworks, particularly in the United Kingdom, that have been launched in and around the 5th of November. There are a variety of scents that are associated with autumn, and the air takes on that very distinct quality, which causes many people, of course, to remember much about this time of year because it's associated with change. When September rolls around, you may be going to a different school, starting a new school year, starting university, starting a job. There's much that changes around this time of year. But there's also another scent that comes along in the air at the present time. Can you smell it? Yes, it's a heady brew of used notes and bullshit, because the improbably named plastic-faced lieutenant, Omid Scabies, has now got some wares to shill. And, undoubtedly, with the imminent publication of his new book, Bellendgame, we are going to be treated to all manner of apparent revelations, naturally sent by this one's wife. For those of you that require a jolly good chortle, I recommend that you go to the Knowledge Vault and you'll find my various analyses, essentially piss takes of Finding Dollars, Funding Freedom, which was basically this one's wife's own diary handed to Omid Scabies, who then pumped out inexorable shite. We're probably going to get more of the same, and it's already started, as Michelle Torber cranks up propaganda organ, which is people telling us Prince Harry, completely by himself, amid Queen Elizabeth's death. Exclusive book excerpt. Excluded from a flight with other members of the royal family, Harry remained in the dark about the monarch's health in her final moments. Author, the improbably named plastic-faced Lieutenant Omid Scabies, writes in his new book, Bellendgame. Prince Harry was famously close with his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth. You wouldn't think so from the way that he ended up treating her, but that's another matter. But in the monarch's final hours, he was kept in the dark about her health, according to an explosive new book. In this passage from Bellendgame, which is out to November the 28th, and exclusively excerpted in this week's People, improbably named plastic-faced lieutenant, author Omid Scabies, offers an intimate look at Harry's journey to the Queen's deathbed last week. In September 2022, Harry, 39, and wife, this one's wife, Duchess of Sussex, 42, visited the United Kingdom for a series of engagements. While there, the palace announced that Queen Elizabeth, 96, had been advised by her doctors to rest. By the next morning, the Sussexes had no idea that Buckingham Palace was already planning for the Queen's final hours and the first days of the monarchy's new era, until the Duke's phone started ringing. An unknown number. He usually ignored those. Has Fantapew's been ringing the sex lines again? You should answer it, this one's wife told him, naturally ordering him about as usual. He tapped accept just before it stopped. Harry hadn't spoken to his father much that year, but this was not the time for any father and son tension. Oh, really? So already we can see that Bellendgame is portraying them as the victims and the decent people, that Although there had been some tensions, which of course all revolved around the behaviour of this one's wife and Harry, they were making themselves out to be the individuals that cared. Charles told him he and Camilla were about to leave Dumfries' house for Balmoral, where Princess Anne was already by the Queen's side. He told Harry to make his way to Scotland immediately. William, whom Charles had just spoken to, was supposedly working on arranging travel. Harry sent a text message to his brother asking how he and Kate planned to get to Scotland and whether they could travel together. No response. With no further information from other family members or palace aides, the Sussexes and their team had to operate in the dark. Oh, the poor lambs. Isn't the royal family awful? Harry was informed that William had already secured a flight with his uncles Andrew and Edward and Edward's wife Sophie, but he couldn't get in touch with anyone about joining that flight. It was upsetting to witness, said a source close to the Sussexes. Harry was completely by himself on this. Well, behave like a twat to your family, this is what you reap. With the world's media now rushing to Aberdeenshire and most flights and train tickets selling out within minutes, travel options dwindled. Another call came through from Charles, who instructed his younger son to come alone. Understandably, Charles is asserting his control there, not wanting the troublemaker to be there at the end of the Queen's life. After all, as we all know, this one's wife caused plenty of trouble for the late Queen Elizabeth in her dotage, and that would be seen as a threat to control in relation to Prince Charles as he then was, and therefore he's going to do what is needed to nullify that threat to control by saying she can't come. Despite already publicly confirming that this one's wife would come with him, always the plan if they were travelling from California for this very situation, he reluctantly agreed after Charles assured him that Kate would not be there either. Charles had cited protocol. But the reality was that Kate chose to stay back to pick up the children from their first day at a new school. They just didn't want this one's wife there, said a former palace aide. This one's wife, a friend added, could sense she wasn't wanted. Oh, really? Gosh, well done for having that sixth sense. For once, the normally useless this one's wife who fails to read the room has picked up on the fact that she wasn't wanted, which of course would amount to a threat to control. Harry sent another text to his brother. Nothing. Though there were available seats on William's chartered Dassault Falcon private jet, which is leaving in less than an hour, Harry was left to fend for himself, which, of course, is all being brought about as a consequence of the behaviour of him and this one's wife. William ignored him, said a family source. He clearly didn't want to see his brother. Princess Eugenie reached out to Harry to see if he had any more information about their grandmother. She had heard from another family member that it was time, but knew little more. With no invite forthcoming from any of the family members, Harry eventually located an available option, a private charter costing $37,000 from Luton Airport, a 40-minute drive from Frogmore without traffic. And with that, Harry started his own race to Scotland. Though rumours of the Queen's passing were rife at this point, Harry had no way of knowing whether it was true. His father doesn't carry a cell phone, and his brother was not acknowledging his existence. When William and the others landed at 3:50 p.m. to discover the news that the Queen had passed away at 3:10 p.m, Harry still had no idea what was going on when his own plane finally took off at 5:35 p.m, and, as his phone service cut out after takeoff, he remained in the dark for the duration of his 70-minute flight. Well, it would appear probably that everybody else was not getting the information either, not just Harry. Back on the ground, there was a tug of war between the Sussexes team and Buckingham Palace over whether to announce the news without Harry being informed. With Her Majesty's death already confirmed to the Prime Minister an hour before Harry left, and all of the senior family members now gathered in Scotland processing the news, royal press secretaries were ready to share the news with the world. The palace claimed Charles tried to call Harry. Sources later told me there was never any proof of this. Oh, did they, Omid Scabies? Well, good job that you're able to get that in there. Once again being the main cheerleader for the Sussexes, and that there was no more time left to delay. Look, at the end of the day, it's unfortunate that Ginger Bollocks wasn't able to find out. But this often happens when somebody dies, and particularly when you're dealing with someone of such international renown as the Queen. I know of many instances among family where a certain individual couldn't be gotten hold of, that they found out afterwards, that people decided that when a family member had died, they didn't want to tell that person because they were away on holiday enjoying themselves, and they didn't want to upset them. At the end of the day, Harry and this one's wife weren't told and kept in the loop, quite simply because they weren't liked. And why was that? They brought it on themselves. It wasn't an arbitrary decision by members of the royal family to say, hey, do you know what? Let's have a good old laugh at Ginger Bollock's expense and this one's wife. Do you know what we'll do? It'll be such great larks if we don't tell him that his grandma has actually died. They've got other things to be thinking about than what Ginger Bollocks requires. His team literally had to beg for them to wait for his plane to land, and they reluctantly agreed to hold the statement back for a little bit. Well, what are you complaining about then? Confirmed a close family source. But as stormy weather over Aberdeen International forced Harry's plane to circle the airport numerous times before landing, patience at the Buckingham Palace press office wore thin. Well, Buckingham Palace can't control the weather, can they? They could wait no longer, and the announcement went live at 6:30 p.m. When Harry's plane finally touched tarmac 20 minutes later, he received a text from this one's wife urging him to call ASAP, followed by a breaking news alert via the BBC News app with the announcement of the Queen's death. Now, ultimately, it's not going to be a surprise to him. He'll have known that she was on her way out. But, of course, notice who's ordering him around again, this one's wife. Palace sources later briefed certain papers that Charles had personally shared the news with his younger son, but this was just a move to save face. If that is accurate, facade management on the part of Charles. Harry was crushed, said a friend of the Duke. His relationship with the Queen was everything to him. Well, if it was, why did he behave like a twat then, orchestrated and puppeteered by his wife? She would have wanted him to know before it went out to the world. They could have waited just a little longer. It would have been nothing in the grand scheme of things, but no one respected that at all. I suspect that's not quite right, because information had already been provided, for instance, to the Prime Minister, and many people within the household, etc., would know. And all it would take is for one member of the household to text a brother, a mother, and say, guess what, the Queen is dead, but don't tell anybody. And in that usual way that humans are completely incapable of keeping things secret, that person then texts somebody else saying, guess what, the Queen's dead, but don't tell anybody. And before you know it, it's out. The longer you wait, the greater the likelihood of the information being out, and therefore they needed to make that announcement. When he arrived at Balmoral, Princess Anne warmly greeted him by squeezing his pods and saying to him, you better not fuck about, you ginger twat, and led him to the Queen's room, where he spent a quiet moment privately paying his respects. He had hoped to see his father, who had made it to Balmoral Castle in time to see his mother alive, to express his sympathies, but he was informed that Charles, William and Camilla had already left for Birkhall together. Again, no invite was extended to Harry. Notice this is all a great big pity play for the Sussexes, showing that at the moment of his grandmother's death, the horrible royal family have excluded him. But it fails, of course, to detail and examine why that was, namely, the behaviour of this one's wife and Harry. That night, after eating, he retired to his room, exhausted by the day's emotional roller coaster. He was glad to have had a private moment to say goodbye to his grandmother, but there was no point in sticking around. With no offer to return with William and the others in the morning, all of his texts, including a thoughtful message about the loss of their grandmother, continued to be ignored. Harry booked his own British Airways ticket on the first available departing flight. In the months that followed their grandmother's funeral, the division between brothers, Prince Harry and Prince William, widened, following the release of Harry and this one's wife's Netflix docu-series and the Duke's revealing memoir, Spare. William believes Harry and this one's wife blindsided the family, even the Queen, with their public complaints and their California self-importance, an opinion he has repeatedly voiced in various ways to friends and aides during the past 2 years. Well, he's not wrong, is he? This one's wife, as a narcissist, wants to make things public in order to get that control and that fuel. And William understands now what he's dealing with. Convinced Harry's been brainwashed by an army of therapists, all of which, of course, have been put in place by this one's wife to make it easier to control him and to drive a wedge between him and his family, again to make him easy to control, William says he no longer even recognises his own brother, a source said. Typical of the impact of a narcissist on those familial relations. As for how he feels about Harry since the release of Spare, a source close to the prince told me there's a huge amount of anger there. He feels betrayed and sad about the situation, but he also doesn't agree with the things his brother feels he has done. He feels he has lost Harry and doesn't want to know this version of him. That version, countered a Spencer family source, is simply Harry being a man who has stepped outside of the institution and see things in a different light. Damn right he does, through the light of his controlling wife. They will never see eye to eye at this point. They're on completely opposite sides. That won't change. In May, Harry made a brief appearance at the coronation of his father, King Charles, aged 75, but was not invited to join the royal family on the palace balcony. This one's wife and their children stayed home, which of course caused substantial thermonuclear wounding to her, as I've explained in parts passim. As the Duke left California on May the 5th for King Charles's coronation, a decision he had made because it was the right thing to support his father on such a big day, his emotions were a world away from how he felt landing in London with knots in his stomach for the Platinum Jubilee just a year earlier. Though he hasn't found closure with his family, he's accepted that things are unlikely to change, particularly with his brother, who refuses to even properly talk with him, said a source, and, of course, with good reason. As Harry later explained to a friend, I'm ready to move on past it. Whether we get an apology or accountability, who knows? Who really cares at this point? An excerpt there from Bellendgame by the improbably named plastic-faced lieutenant. And are you already getting that sickly feeling in your stomach about, oh, look, it's another woe-is-me whinge fest on the part of the Sussexes? Despite the fact that they've milked the pity plays over and over again, here they come with yet more in improbably named plastic-faced lieutenant's book, Bellendgame. And, of course, it's going to be the case that there's going to be more of this. They are sanctioning this information because Scobie is a mouthpiece for them. That was clear with Finding Dollars, Funding Freedom. And we're going to see a lot more of that, as undoubtedly this book has been written with the involvement of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, attempting to draw sympathy whilst continuing to throw pelters at the royal family. Despite their claims that they weren't going to go down that route again, it's just too tempting for the narcissist that is Harry's wife to do so, and also for Harry, who remains in her grip. I'm HG Tudor. Thank you for listening.